Sunday was the deadline for 2024 presidential candidates to report their quarterly finances. Former President Trump's campaign leads the pack with $37.5 million in cash on hand. Tim Scott, Ron DeSantis, and Nikki Haley were the only other Republican candidates with more than $10 million in their bank accounts. CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett joins me now. Major, so former President Trump has more money than the others combined. How do they stay competitive?
Well, one quick note, John. When you put together the accounting for these reports, you always make it look as favorable as possible. A couple things we don't know about former President Trump's accounting. We don't know how much he has spent or needs to spend on his ongoing lawyers' fees for all the various indictments and civil cases that he is facing this fall and into next year. That is a kind of black box within the Trump campaign accounting mechanism. So he may be as wealthy as he looks in terms of cash on hand. He may not be. He may be holding some of those lawyers' fees until the fourth quarter, disclosing them later then to making it look more formidable now. Because one thing the former president's campaign always wants to do, as long as it possibly can, is look formidable in polling and formidable in fundraising. And this third quarter report certainly underscores that intention. As for the others, they're competitive, John, among themselves. They are not competitive with the former president. Right now, he is a polling and fundraising machine, and the other Republicans have to stay in the race first and hope that dynamic changes. But that's a hope they've been clinging to for many months. So far, it remains unrealized.
Let me ask you about two of those who are in that clinging position. And you can break these apart if I've made it a weird comparison. But Tim Scott is at about 2% in the polls, and he's doing quite well in the fundraising part of this competition. Former Vice President Mike Pence, who under traditional rules of politics would be kind of in the hunt, is not in the hunt. And he's also raised not very much money, $1.2 million cash on hand and $620,000 in debt. What do those two candidacies tell you about the race, and should they stay in the race by the calculus of the race as it goes on right now?
Well, of course, that's a candidate's decision and his team to make. But Tim Scott is a live campaign. Mike Pence, the former vice president, is getting dangerously close to zombie campaign status. And that's not a criticism of the former vice president or his rhetoric or anything like that. But campaigns, John, as you well know, function on the basis of their ability to pay for the things you need to pay for, advertising and campaign events. And when you're running debt like that and you can't raise money, eventually you run out of that capability. And the former vice president is nearing that status. Not there yet, but he is dangerously close to it. Tim Scott looks better than he actually is. That cash on hand is also a result of a huge loan he got from his senatorial reelection campaign, so it makes it look more formidable than it actually is. And significantly today, the super PAC that is backing Tim Scott decided to pull all $27 million it had reserved for this fall for television ad campaigns. The leader of that, who I was texting with later today, said they are not going to waste their money on an electorate that's not ready yet for a Trump alternative. So they're going to hold their resources to January or February, again, hoping some other dynamic takes over that campaign. So Tim Scott wants to hang around, and he's got more capability to do that than the former vice president.
You know, that other dynamic that they've been looking for since this race began seems to be thwarted by something that happened again today, which is every time the former president engages with the courts in some way, he raises money off of it, which he did again today with respect to this gag order. What's your take on how the former president's responded to this? Also, because within the Republican race, this question of whether you're allowed to speak and who tells you can and can't speak is one of the kind of undertones in the party and in the discourse.
Right. So there is a positive feedback loop for the former president. I mentioned at the top, John, that he has to pay his lawyers. Well, one of the ways he pays his lawyers, interestingly, is fundraising off his various legal problems and legal defeats that his lawyers are suffering more frequently in civil and criminal court proceedings. So there is something that's positive, if you will think about it that way, in terms of fundraising, but we're not sure yet about the politics. One thing that hasn't happened yet, John, is Republicans haven't really taken this whole question of legal trouble and the reasons underlying it head on. Now, the judge today said that limited gag order is because the former president is saying and doing things in the public space that could threaten a prosecutor, potential witnesses, or jurors. You would think Republicans, if they didn't think the indictment itself was necessarily an opening, would say basically preserving the functionality of the judicial system is something to take on. We'll see if they do, but we've been in that wait-and-see posture for lots and lots of months.
Right. Major Garrett in Washington. Always great to talk to you, Major. Thank you.
Thank you, John.